A man can be stripped of everything: his home, his health, his name. He can be ground down by the world until he is nothing but bone and memory, a ghost haunting the edges of a life he once knew. When all else is gone, when the universe has taken its full measure of a man, what is left? For Silas, the answer was a blanket. It was coarse wool, olive drab, and smelled of dust, rain, and the faint ghosts of 1,000 campfires. It was government issue, a relic from a time when his name was Sergeant, not Hey You. He sat on the frozen pavement, his back against the brick wall of a pharmacy that had closed hours ago. The December wind was a blade, slicing through the thin layers of his worn-out fatigues. It found every tear, every frayed seam. It was a personal and malicious wind. Each gust was a reminder of his failure, his invisibility. People hurried past, collars turned up, heads bowed against the cold. They were blurs of color and purpose, their faces illuminated for a moment by the warm glow of storefronts before they vanished into the night. They did not see him, or if they did, they saw a problem to be avoided, a piece of unfortunate scenery. Silas had tried to be seen. He had stood in lines at the VA, a manila folder of his life clutched in his hands, only to be told he had the wrong form, the wrong office, the wrong day. He had spoken to police officers about the things stolen from his small encampment under the bridge: a rucksack, a small stove, his dog tags. They had taken a report with the weary patience of men dealing with a nuisance. Nothing ever came of it. He had tried shelters, but the chaos, the smells of desperation and sickness, the predatory eyes of younger, harder men, it was worse than the cold. The army had taught him how to survive in the wild, not in the heart of the civilization he had sworn to protect. So he was here, on this patch of unforgiving concrete, with nothing left but a blanket. And even that he was about to give away. Across the narrow street, a man and a little girl came out of a brightly lit diner. The man was enormous, a mountain of black leather and denim. Tattoos crawled up his neck from beneath the collar of his vest. His beard was a thick, dark thicket, and his face looked like it had been carved from granite and then hit with a hammer a few times for character. He was the kind of man people gave a wide berth. He was the kind of man Silas would have been wary of even in his prime. But the little girl holding his hand was the opposite. She was tiny, a small bird in a pink coat that was clearly not thick enough for this vicious cold. She shivered, a full-body tremor that was visible even from across the street. Her father, the mountain, knelt down, trying to zip her coat up higher, his huge, scarred hands fumbling with the tiny zipper. Silas watched. He saw the girl's lips tinged with blue. He saw her small shoulders hunch against a gust of wind. He felt the phantom cold of a long-ago battlefield, the memory of a brother in arms shivering in the Afghan mountains. You don't let your people freeze. It was a rule burned into him deeper than any regulation. He didn't think. He acted. Getting to his feet was a process. His joints screamed, stiff from the cold and years of hard living. He swayed for a moment, a ship finding its balance in a storm. He folded the blanket, not neatly, his fingers were too numb for that, but with a practiced efficiency that was pure muscle memory. He held it to his chest, its familiar weight a strange comfort, and started across the street. The biker saw him coming. Of course he did. The man's eyes, deep-set and watchful, locked onto Silas. He stood up slowly, placing himself between Silas and the little girl. It wasn't an aggressive move, but it was a clear one. A wall, a statement. This far and no further. Silas didn't stop. He didn't look at the man's face. He looked at the child. He saw his own daughter, a ghost from a life he'd lost long ago, a life before the wars and the bottle and the long, slow fall to this sidewalk. He saw a little girl who was cold. He stopped a few feet away, holding out the folded blanket. He didn't speak. His voice was a rusty hinge he rarely used, and he wasn't sure it would work. He just held out the blanket, an offering. The biker's name was Bear. He was the president of the local charter of the Hells Angels. He had buried friends, fought enemies, and faced down cops and feds. He was not a man easily surprised, but this surprised him. He had seen the homeless man across the street, another shadow in the city's margins. He had braced himself for the usual requests: $1, a cigarette, a story. He had not expected this. The man was gaunt, his face a roadmap of hardship. His eyes were the color of a faded sky, and they held a weariness that Bear recognized. It was the look of a soldier who had seen too much. But in this moment, those eyes weren't looking at him. They were fixed on his daughter Lily, and they held no threat, only a strange, quiet urgency. "She's cold," Silas said. The words were a croak, sandpaper on rust. Lily looked from the shabby man to her father, her shivering momentarily forgotten. She saw the offered blanket. It was old and gray, but it looked thick. It looked warm. Bear didn't move for a long second. He was processing. The man was offering his only protection against a night that could kill him. For his daughter. A stranger. The sheer, illogical humanity of the act hit Bear like a physical blow. He looked from the man's desperate, sincere face to the threadbare army jacket, the worn boots, the shivering that the man was trying to hide. He made a decision. He nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low rumble. He reached out and took the blanket. It was heavy, solid. He unfolded it and wrapped it around Lily's small shoulders. She immediately burrowed into it, her small face disappearing into the folds. The shivering subsided, replaced by a sigh of relief. "It's warm, Daddy," she mumbled from inside her new cocoon. Silas watched, a flicker of something, satisfaction maybe, in his tired eyes. He gave a single, curt nod, as if completing a mission. He turned to leave, his duty done. He had nothing left to offer. He would find a doorway, curl up, and hope to see the morning. "Hey!" The voice stopped him. It wasn't a request, it was a command. Silas turned back. Bear was looking at him, his expression unreadable. "You haven't eaten." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. Bear had been watching him from the diner window for 20 minutes. He had seen the way Silas's eyes had tracked the waitress bringing out plates of food. He had seen the hollows in his cheeks. "I'm all right," Silas said, the automatic response of a man who had long ago forgotten how to accept help. Bear took a step forward. He was still a mountain, but the hard edges seemed to have softened slightly. "That wasn't a question. Come inside, get a hot meal." Silas hesitated. The warmth of the diner, the smell of coffee and frying bacon, was a siren's call. But it was a world he no longer belonged to. He would be stared at. The waitress would be annoyed. He would have to sit there, a stain on their clean, bright world. "No thank you," he said, his voice firmer. "You take care of your girl." He started to turn again. "I am," Bear said, his voice dropping lower, gaining an intensity that made Silas freeze. "I'm teaching her that when someone does something good, you do something good back. It's called honor. You understand honor, don't you, Sergeant?" Silas flinched. The rank, spoken aloud, was like a ghost's touch on his shoulder. How did he know? Then he remembered the faint outline of sergeant stripes still visible on the sleeve of his old jacket, a shadow of the man he used to be. The biker gestured with his head toward the diner door. "My daughter is warm because of you. The least I can do is put a hot meal in your belly. Come on, I'm not asking." Something in the man's tone broke through Silas's defenses. It wasn't pity, it was respect. It was an order from a man who understood command. Reluctantly, feeling the eyes of the street on him, Silas shuffled toward the diner door that Bear held open for him. The blast of warm air that hit him was so intoxicating, it almost made him dizzy. Inside, the diner was a haven of light and noise. The clatter of cutlery, the murmur of conversations, the hiss of the grill. A waitress, a young woman with tired eyes and a pen tucked behind her ear, glanced up. Her face, initially open, tightened as she saw Silas. It was a look he knew well. It was the look that said, "Not in my section." Bear saw it too. He put a hand on Silas's shoulder, a gesture that was both reassuring and a clear signal to the rest of the room. This man was with him. "We need a booth," Bear rumbled to the waitress, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Back corner." She nodded, her professional smile snapping back into place, and led them to a worn vinyl booth. Lily, still wrapped in the wool blanket, slid in one side. Bear gestured for Silas to take the other. Silas hesitated, looking at the clean seat. He was filthy. He would leave a mark. "Sit," Bear said, the command soft but absolute. Silas sat. The vinyl was cool against his legs. He kept his hands in his lap, acutely aware of the grime under his fingernails. He felt like a crow in a cage of canaries. Bear slid in across from him, a solid, immovable presence. "Coffee," he said to the waitress. "Black, and one for him." He looked at Silas. "What do you want to eat?" "Anything." Silas looked at the menu the waitress had slapped down. The words swam. Prices jumped out at him, each one an accusation. He hadn't held money in his hands in weeks. He just shook his head, unable to speak. "Bring him the lumberjack special," Bear told the waitress. "Pancakes, eggs, bacon, sausage, and a tall glass of orange juice." She scribbled it down and hurried away. An awkward silence fell over the table. Lily peeked out from the blanket, her eyes wide and curious as she studied Silas. Silas kept his gaze fixed on the salt shaker. Bear leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on the table. "My name's Bear. This is Lily." Silas risked a glance up. He met the biker's eyes. They were a clear, steady gray. They were eyes that had seen things. "Silas," he rasped. "Silas," Bear repeated, tasting the name. "Where'd you serve, Silas?" "Afghanistan," Silas said, the word tasting like ash. "Kandahar, 101st. Bear nodded slowly. "Marines, Fallujah," he said, and in those two words, a bridge was built across the table. They were no longer just a biker and a homeless man. They were two veterans, speaking a language no one else in the diner could understand. The coffee came. Silas wrapped his numb fingers around the warm mug, letting the heat seep into his bones. He took a sip. It was bitter and strong, and the most wonderful thing he had ever tasted. "You're in a bad way, Silas," Bear said, his voice quiet. It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation. Silas didn't answer. He just stared into his coffee cup. What was there to say? The evidence was all around him. "This isn't just bad luck," Bear continued, his gaze sharp, analytical. He'd seen a lot of vets fall on hard times. Alcohol, PTSD, a world that didn't know what to do with them. But he saw something else in Silas. Fear. Not the ambient, weary fear of the streets. This was a specific, targeted fear. He'd seen it in his own men when they were being hunted. Bear had noticed something when Silas had walked across the street. A slight limp, a wince as he put weight on his left leg. And when he'd sat down, the cuff of his pants had ridden up, revealing a dark, ugly bruise circling his ankle. It was fresh. It was the shape of a hand. "Who did that to your ankle?" Bear asked, his voice flat. Silas jerked, sloshing coffee onto the table. His eyes went wide with panic. He quickly pulled his pant leg down. "I fell," he mumbled. "Slipped on some ice." It was a weak lie, and they both knew it. The waitress arrived with a tray laden with food. She set a huge platter in front of Silas. The smell of hot syrup and sizzling bacon was overwhelming. For a moment, Silas forgot his fear. He stared at the food, his stomach clenching with a hunger so profound it was painful. "Eat," Bear said gently. Silas picked up a fork. His hand was shaking. He started with the eggs, shoveling them into his mouth without tasting them. He was an animal, starving and shamed. He forced himself to slow down, to chew. He could feel Bear's eyes on him, not judging, just watching. "Silas," Bear said, his voice calm and steady as a rock. "Look at me." Slowly, reluctantly, Silas raised his head. "I've been there," Bear said. "Not here," he gestured around the diner, "but in the dark. I know what it looks like when a man is being backed into a corner. I know the look of a man who is being preyed on. You're not just down on your luck. Someone is doing this to you." The words hung in the air. Silas stopped chewing. He felt a cold dread wash over him, colder than any winter wind. To say it aloud was to make it real. To speak the name was to summon the devil. "You don't know anything," Silas whispered, his voice trembling. "I know that blanket you gave my daughter was probably the last thing of value you owned," Bear said, his voice like gravel. "I know you're a soldier, and soldiers don't give up their gear unless they have no other choice. I know you're hurt and you're scared. But you're not scared of the cold or the hunger. You're scared of a person." Lily, sensing the tension, had gone still. She watched Silas, her little face full of concern. Silas looked at the little girl, her face framed by the drab wool of his blanket. He had wanted to protect her from the cold. Now her father was offering to protect him from something far worse. Could he dare to hope? Hope was a dangerous thing. It had been beaten out of him systematically over the last year. He looked down at his plate. He thought of Mr. Thompson, Arthur Thompson, director of the Patriots Rest Transition Home, a pillar of the community, a man who smiled for the cameras and shook hands with the mayor, a man who had a handshake like a vice and eyes like chips of ice. He remembered Thompson's office, the polished desk, the flags, American and POW/my, standing in the corner, a mockery of everything they represented. He remembered signing the papers, giving Thompson control over his VA disability payments in exchange for a room at the facility. It had seemed like a lifeline. It had been a noose. He remembered the small, calculated cruelties, the fees for food, for laundry, for administrative services that ate up every penny of his check. He remembered the threats when he'd questioned it, the way Thompson would lean in close, his voice a silky poison, reminding Silas that he was a nobody, a drunk, a broken soldier that no one would ever believe. Who were they going to listen to, Silas? Me or you? He remembered last week, when he'd finally worked up the courage to say he was leaving, that he was going to report him. Thompson hadn't even raised his voice. He'd simply grabbed Silas's ankle as he'd tried to walk away, twisting it until Silas had collapsed. "You're not going anywhere," Thompson had hissed, his public smile gone, revealing the predator beneath. "You belong to me now. Your check belongs to me. You are my charity case, and you will be grateful." Then he had thrown him out, keeping his papers, his ID, the last of his money. "Let's see how you do on your own," he had sneered. "You'll be back. They always come back." A tear slid down Silas's cheek and dropped onto his bacon. He didn't even notice. "Tell me his name," Bear said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Silas shook his head, a violent, jerky motion. "You can't," he choked out. "He's important. He knows people. The cops. They're his friends. He has dinner with the chief. No one will listen." "I'm not the cops," Bear said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, but gaining a frightening intensity. "And I'm listening. Tell me the truth, Silas. Let me help you." Silas looked from Bear's unyielding face to Lily, who was watching him with wide, trusting eyes. He had protected her. It was a simple, clean act. Maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't entirely broken. Maybe there was one good thing left. He took a shuddering breath. The confession came out in a torrent, a broken whisper of names and dates and humiliations. He told him about Arthur Thompson. He told him about the stolen checks, the threats, the isolation, the casual cruelty disguised as charity. He told him about the other men at the facility, too scared or too broken to speak up. He told him everything. When he was finished, he was shaking. He felt raw, exposed, terrified. He had just handed this stranger a weapon that could be used against him. He had broken Thompson's cardinal rule: silence. Bear didn't speak for a long time. His face was a mask of cold fury. His jaw was tight, the muscles bunching under his beard. His hands were flat on the table, but his knuckles were white. He wasn't looking at Silas anymore. He was looking at something far away, a place of cold, hard decisions. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm, but it was the calm at the center of a hurricane. "Finish your meal, Silas," he said. Then he reached into his vest, pulled out his phone, and made a call. The voice on the other end was gruff. "Yeah." "It's me," Bear said. "President, everything okay? You're late for the meeting." "Change of plans," Bear said, his eyes on Silas, who was now eating slowly, methodically, as if chewing on the first bit of hope he'd had in a year. "I need you to make the call." There was a pause on the other end. "What level?" "Echo," Bear said. The word was heavy. Code Echo was rare. It wasn't for a bar fight or a rival club. It was for a brother in dire straits, an injustice that the law couldn't or wouldn't touch. It was a call to war. "Jesus, Bear," the voice on the phone said, all business now. "Where?" "Our town, my location. I'll text the address for the muster point. I want every chapter within 500 miles. I want them quiet. I want them disciplined. And I want them here by sunrise." "How many?" Bear looked at Silas, at the ghost of a soldier sitting in the booth. He thought of the man, Thompson, who cloaked his evil in charity and patriotism. This wasn't a job for a sledgehammer. It was a job for an army. All of them, Bear said. Get me all of them. He hung up the phone and slid it back into his vest. He looked at Silas. The fear was still in his eyes, but it was mixed with a fragile, bewildered hope. What did you do?" Silas asked. "I called some friends," Bear said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time. "They're going to help us handle this. You're not alone anymore, Sergeant. Now, eat your pancakes. We have a busy day tomorrow." Silas looked down at his plate, then back at the giant biker, then at the little girl who was now dozing in the booth, snug in his old blanket. For the first time in a very long time, he believed it. He was not alone. And Arthur Thompson was about to have a very, very bad day. The first bikes arrived before the moon had set. They came not as a roar, but as a whisper. They rolled in from the east, from the west, ghosts on the highway, their engines a low thrum that was felt more than heard. They didn't come into the town. The muster point was an abandoned truck stop 5 miles out, a place of cracked asphalt and skeletal fuel pumps. Bear was there, waiting. He had left Silas in the care of the diner waitress, a woman named Maria. After hearing the story, her initial suspicion of Silas had transformed into a fierce maternal protectiveness. She'd made him a fresh pot of coffee and told him to stay as long as he liked, her hand briefly resting on his arm. An awakened bystander. Bear had given her a number to call if anyone came looking for Silas, and a thick roll of cash to cover any trouble. Now he stood in the cold, the headlights of his own bike cutting a swath through the darkness. First came 2 scouts, their bikes gliding to a halt beside him, then 5 more, then 20. A river of steel and leather flowed into the truck stop, a silent, disciplined tide. They came from charters hours away, men who had dropped everything, jobs, families, sleep, at the single word from their president. There was Rhino, the National Sergeant at Arms, a man with a law degree and a face like a roadmap of bad decisions. There was Tech, a wiry kid who could ghost a phone or crack a database faster than he could down a beer. There was Doc, a former combat medic with a quiet demeanor and hands that could set a bone or stitch a wound in the dark. By the time the first hint of gray light touched the eastern sky, there were 175 of them. 175 Hell's Angels, their bikes arranged in neat, orderly rows. They stood in small groups, drinking coffee from thermoses, their voices low. This wasn't a party, it was an assembly, an army gathering in the dawn. Bear stood on the flatbed of a derelict truck, Rhino beside him. He looked out at the faces of his brothers, hard faces, loyal faces. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice carrying easily in the still morning air. "I'm not going to waste your time. We have a job to do." He told them about Silas. He told them about his service, his fall, and the blanket he gave to a cold little girl. He told them about Arthur Thompson, the respected predator hiding in plain sight. He told them about the stolen money, the threats, the abuse of trust. He spoke simply, without emotion, laying out the facts like a battle plan. When he finished, a deep, angry silence settled over the crowd. It was the silence of 175 men who understood injustice. Many of them were veterans themselves. They had seen the system fail their brothers time and time again. "This is not a smash and grab," Bear said, his voice hard. "This is not about violence. Violence is messy, it's stupid, and it would prove Thompson right, that we're just thugs and he's the victim. We are not going to be thugs. We are going to be surgeons." He pointed to Tech. "Tech, I want everything you can find on Arthur Thompson. Financials, emails, phone records. I want to know who he talks to, where his money goes. I want to find his other victims. He didn't start with Silas. Men like him never have just one." He looked at Rhino. "Rhino, you're the lawyer. Once we have the evidence, I want it packaged perfectly. I want it airtight. I want it delivered to the one cop in this town we can trust. I know one, Deputy Miller. He's ex-Army, did 2 tours. He owes me a favor. But we don't go to him until we can hand him a conviction on a silver platter." He swept his gaze over the crowd. "The rest of you are the wall. Thompson's power comes from his reputation and Silas's isolation. We are going to take both of those away from him. We are going to be a visible, silent, constant presence. He will not be able to take a step without seeing one of us. He will feel our eyes on him when he eats his lunch, when he goes to his office, when he sleeps in his bed. We're going to surround him, contain him, and let him suffocate in the truth of what he is." A low growl of approval went through the crowd. "We are going to be disciplined," Bear commanded. "No one speaks to him, no one threatens him, no one even looks at him with aggression. You are statues, you are shadows, you are a promise. Is that understood?" A unified roar answered him. "Yes, Prez." "Silas is our brother now," Bear finished, his voice dropping but losing none of its power. He wore the uniform, he stood a post, and he was left behind. Today, we go back for him. Let's ride. The plan unfolded with terrifying precision. Phase 1 was containment. As the sun rose over the small, respectable town, the bikers moved in. They came not as a thunderous horde, but in pairs and small groups. 2 bikes parked across the street from Thompson's pristine colonial home. 4 more took up positions in the parking lot opposite the Patriots' Rest facility. Others parked near the town hall, the country club, the expensive restaurant where Thompson held his power lunches. They did nothing. They just sat on their bikes or stood beside them, arms crossed. They were silent, unmoving, their leather vests a uniform of silent judgment. They were a living, breathing accusation. Arthur Thompson's day began like any other. He woke up, drank his imported coffee, and read the financial news. He put on his tailored suit, the armor of his respectability. He was feeling good. That derelict Silas was gone. He'd probably crawl back in a week, begging. It was a satisfying thought. He walked out his front door and stopped dead. Across the street, 2 large, bearded men in Hell's Angels vests stood beside their motorcycles. They weren't looking at him. They were looking straight ahead. But he knew. He knew they were there for him. A flicker of annoyance, then a prickle of unease. He dismissed it. A coincidence. He got in his Mercedes and drove to work. The unease grew when he saw the 4 bikes in the lot across from his office. More of them. Still silent, still watchful. He walked into the Patriots' Rest, the facility he ran with such celebrated charity. He was a pillar of this community, a savior to broken men. He would not be intimidated by motorcycle thugs. Inside, he tried to work, but he couldn't focus. He kept looking out the window. They were still there, unmoving. It was like being watched by gargoyles. Meanwhile, Tech was in a van parked a block away, his fingers flying across a keyboard. He was a digital wraith, slipping through firewalls, peeling back the layers of Arthur Thompson's carefully constructed life. He found the offshore accounts. He found the emails to a shady real estate developer about acquiring the Patriots' Rest property once it was condemned. He found the encrypted files detailing the fees skimmed from the veterans' disability checks. And he found the others. He cross-referenced names of former residents with social services records. He found a pattern. Men would come in, sign over their benefits, stay for a few months, and then disappear, flagged as uncooperative or relapsed. He found 3 other men like Silas, scattered in homeless shelters and underpasses in neighboring cities. Bear dispatched teams, 2 bikers per man. They didn't go in hard. They brought coffee and food. They brought a message. We're friends of Silas. We know what Thompson did. We're making it right. We just need you to tell the truth. At first, the men were terrified. But the sight of these intimidating bikers offering help, not harm, speaking Silas's name like a password, slowly broke through their fear. By noon, Rhino had 3 more sworn, notarized statements. Back in town, the pressure was mounting. Thompson's phone started ringing. The mayor. The chief of police. "Arthur, what the hell is going on? There are Hell's Angels all over town. They're not doing anything, just sitting there. It's making people nervous." "I have no idea," Thompson lied, his voice tight. "It's probably some gang nonsense. I'm sure they'll move on." But they didn't move on. When he went to his lunch at the country club, 2 bikers were at the gate. They didn't block him, they just watched him pass. Inside, he couldn't eat. He could feel their presence, a weight on the entire town. His respectable friends kept glancing out the windows, their conversations strained. His armor of respectability was beginning to crack. He was no longer Arthur Thompson, town benefactor. He was the man the bikers were watching. He started to panic. This was about Silas. It had to be. The bum had found some trouble. Thompson's mind raced. He had to get to Silas. He had to shut him up, buy him off, or scare him back into silence. He still had Silas's ID, his social security card. He owned him. He left his lunch unfinished and drove back to his office. He stormed inside, his face a mask of fury. He called his assistant. "Find out where that worthless drunk Silas is staying. Check the shelters, the missions. I need to find him, now." What he didn't know was that his assistant's brother was a veteran who had been helped by a legitimate charity. What he didn't know was that she had long harbored suspicions about her boss's charity. What he didn't know was that the sight of the silent, watchful bikers had awakened something in her, a sense of justice. She picked up her phone and made a call, not to a shelter, but to the number Maria, the waitress, had given her. The call went to a burner phone held by Bear. He listened, his face grim. "He's looking for Silas. He's rattled." "It's time," Rhino said, holding up a folder thick with evidence. "We have enough, more than enough." "No," Bear said. "Enough isn't the point. I don't want him just convicted. I want him undone. I want him to tear off his own mask. He's panicking. Let's give him a reason to make a mistake." Bear made another call, to Silas. Silas was in a small, clean motel room paid for by the club. He had showered. He was wearing new clothes. He had eaten 3 square meals. He was starting to feel human again. But when he heard Bear's plan, the old fear returned. "I can't," he said, his voice shaking. "I can't face him." "You won't be alone," Bear's voice came through the phone, calm and solid. "I will be with you. My brothers will be with you. He can't hurt you anymore, Silas. This is the last step. You need to do this. Not for us, for you. You need to be the one to watch him fall." There was a long silence. Silas looked at himself in the mirror. He didn't see a bum anymore. He saw a soldier. A tired soldier, but a soldier nonetheless. "Okay," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "What do I need to do?" The trap was set. Silas, using a burner phone, called Thompson's office. The assistant, part of the plan now, patched him through. "Mr. Thompson?" Silas's voice was deliberately shaky, fearful. Thompson's voice was a balm of false concern. "Silas, my boy, I'd been so worried. Where are you? Are you all right?" I made a mistake," Silas stammered. "I'm sorry, I can't make it out here. I need to come back, please. I'll do whatever you say." Triumph surged through Thompson. He had won. The bum had come crawling back, just as he'd predicted. The bikers meant nothing. "Of course, son," Thompson said, his voice oozing manipulative sympathy. "My door is always open. But we need to regularize things, for your own protection. There are some papers you need to sign. A power of attorney. It will allow me to manage your affairs properly, so something like this never happens again." "Okay," Silas whispered. "Where?" "Meet me at the office, in 1 hour. And Silas, come alone. We don't want any of your new friends to misunderstand our arrangement." "I will," Silas promised. Thompson hung up, a cruel smile on his face. He pulled the documents from his desk drawer. They would give him total control over Silas's life, his benefits, everything, forever. He would own him. An hour later, Silas walked toward the Patriots' Rest. He was terrified. His heart was a drum against his ribs. But as he walked, he saw them. A biker on a bench, reading a paper. 2 more leaning against a wall down the street. They didn't look at him, but he felt their presence like a shield. He was not alone. He wore a small, nearly invisible microphone clipped to his collar. He walked into Thompson's office. The man was sitting behind his large desk, the picture of benevolence. The flags stood sentinel behind him. "Silas," Thompson said, standing and spreading his arms wide. "Welcome home." Silas just stood there. "Come now, sit down," Thompson said, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. He gestured to the chair, the same chair where he had been humiliated and broken. Silas sat. Thompson slid the papers across the desk. "Just a formality, my boy. This will ensure you are always taken care of." Silas looked at the papers. He didn't read them. He looked up at Thompson. "You told me I belonged to you," he said, his voice quiet. Thompson's smile faltered for a second. "I meant that I would care for you, Silas, that you have a place here." "No," Silas said, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. "You meant you owned me, like this desk, like these flags you hide behind. The mask began to crack. Thompson's face hardened. "You are an ungrateful wretch," he hissed, his voice dropping to the venomous whisper Silas knew so well. "I gave you a roof over your head. I saved you from yourself. You owe me." "You stole from me," Silas said, his voice steady now. "You stole from all of us. You preyed on us when we were at our weakest because it made you feel strong." Thompson snapped. He stood up, leaning over the desk, his face contorted with rage. His public persona was gone, burned away by the truth. "You are nothing," he spat, his voice no longer a whisper but a raw, ugly snarl. "You are a broken toy that I picked up out of the gutter. You belong to me. Everything you get, every penny from the government for your pathetic, broken mind, it belongs to me. It is my payment for having to deal with scum like you. Now sign the papers." It was the fatal flaw, the confession, the raw, unfiltered truth of his evil soul, spoken aloud in his sanctuary of lies. And every word was being broadcast to a speaker in Tech's van, where Bear, Rhino, and Deputy Miller were listening. Miller, his face pale with disgust, nodded once to Bear. The door to Thompson's office burst open. Thompson spun around, his face a mess of shock and fury. Deputy Miller stood there, his hand on his service weapon. Behind him, 2 more uniformed officers. "Arthur Thompson," Miller said, his voice ringing with authority. "You are under arrest for fraud, extortion, and theft." Thompson stared, dumbfounded. "Miller, what is the meaning of this? This is a misunderstanding. This man is a delusional, homeless alcoholic." "We have your confession, Arthur," Miller said coldly. "We have sworn statements from 3 other veterans you saved. We have your bank records from the Cayman Islands. But most of all," he gestured to Silas, who was now standing tall and straight, "we have him." Thompson's eyes darted from Miller to Silas, and for the first time he saw him. Not as a bum, not as a victim, but as the agent of his destruction. His face crumpled. The predator, cornered and exposed, was suddenly pathetic. As the officers cuffed him, reading him his rights, Thompson's eyes fell on the window, and he saw them. All of them. 175 Hell's Angels, now standing in the street, a silent, unmovable army of witnesses. They weren't cheering. They were just watching, their promise fulfilled. The arrest of Arthur Thompson sent a shockwave through the town. The story was on the front page of the local paper, the lead on the evening news. The pillar of the community was a fraud, a predator who used patriotism as a cloak for his greed. The carefully constructed edifice of his life came crashing down in a single cathartic afternoon. The legal resolution was swift and brutal. Faced with the mountain of evidence Rhino had compiled, the irrefutable recording, the financial trails, the tearful testimonies of Silas and the other veterans the bikers had located, Thompson's high-priced lawyers could do little. The district attorney, under intense public and media pressure, threw the book at him. The trial was a formality. Thompson sat in court, a shrunken figure in a rumpled suit, his arrogance replaced by a sullen, bewildered anger. He was convicted on all counts. At the sentencing, the judge, a woman known for her stern demeanor, looked down at him with undisguised contempt. "You did more than steal money, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. "You stole a man's dignity. You preyed on the very people our society is sworn to honor and protect. You used the flag as a prop and the word patriot as a weapon. You are a disgrace to this community and to this nation. The justice system failed these men. You were their last resort, and you became their worst nightmare." The sentence was the maximum allowed by law, 20 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole. A ripple of quiet satisfaction went through the gallery, where Silas sat with Bear, Lily, and a dozen other bikers, their leather vests a stark contrast to the polished wood of the courtroom. The fallout was immediate. The Patriots' Rest was shut down, its assets seized. A full-scale state investigation was launched, uncovering years of corruption and leading to the censure of 2 town officials in the forced retirement of the police chief who had been Thompson's friend. The system, shamed into action, began to correct itself. In the state legislature, a new bill was proposed, the Silas Act, designed to provide greater oversight for private veterans charities and create a dedicated advocate for veterans navigating the VA bureaucracy. But for Bear and his brothers, the legal victory was only half the battle. Their promise to Silas was not just about justice, it was about restoration. The day after the arrest, Silas was not in a motel anymore. The club had rented him a small, clean apartment on the quiet side of town. It was sparsely furnished, but to Silas, it was a palace. They didn't just give him the keys. A dozen bikers, men with names like an inventory of a hardware store, wrench, hammer, fuse, spent a Saturday putting it together. They assembled furniture, hung curtains, and stocked the fridge with so much food it could have fed a platoon. They didn't treat him like a charity case. They treated him like a brother moving into a new place. They argued over where the couch should go, drank beer on his small balcony, and told war stories, both from the military and the road. For the first time in years, Silas laughed. A real, deep laugh that came from his belly. Doc, the club's medic, sat with him and went over his medical needs, making appointments and navigating the VA's online portal with a practiced ease that was baffling and miraculous to Silas. Tech worked his magic and recovered the funds from Thompson's seized accounts, setting up a trust that would provide Silas with a steady income. His own money finally returned to him. Rhino handled the paperwork to get him a new ID, a new social security card, a new beginning. One evening, Bear came by. He didn't bring an army this time. He just brought Lily. She ran to Silas and gave him a hug. "We brought you a housewarming present," she said, holding up a small, slightly lopsided knitted square. It was olive drab. "She's learning to knit," Bear explained, a proud smile in his eyes. "She wanted to make you a new blanket. It might take a while." Silas took the small square of wool, his rough fingers tracing the uneven stitches. He felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the apartment's heating. "It's the best blanket I've ever seen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. 6 months passed. The seasons turned. Winter's harsh grip gave way to a gentle spring, which blossomed into a warm, vibrant summer. The town forgot about Arthur Thompson. The bikers, their job done, had long since dispersed back to their own chapters, their silent presence a fading, legendary memory. But the promise remained. Silas was a changed man. The hollows in his cheeks had filled out. The haunted look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a calm, quiet confidence. He had put on weight. He stood taller. He had found a part-time job at a motorcycle repair shop owned by a local club member, his old skills as an army mechanic proving surprisingly useful. He was good with his hands. He was patient. He was reliable. He spent his mornings volunteering at the new, legitimate Veterans Center that had opened in the wake of the scandal. He would sit with the younger vets, the ones just back from tours in places he recognized, their eyes holding the same ghosts he had once carried. He didn't preach, he just listened. He would pour them a cup of coffee and say, "I've been there, you're not alone." Sometimes that was all it took. His apartment was no longer just a place to live, it was a home. Photos sat on his bookshelf, not just of his old army unit, but new ones. A picture of him and Bear, arms around each other at a club barbecue. A picture of Lily, proudly holding up a finished, if still lopsided, blanket. He had reconnected with his sister in Oregon, the club having tracked her down and facilitated the first difficult phone call. They talked every Sunday now. He was part of a family. He had a place at the Hells Angels clubhouse, a seat that was always reserved for him. He wasn't a member, but he was more than a friend. He was their sergeant, a title of utmost respect. They gave him a leather vest of his own. It didn't have the club patches on the back, but on the front, over the heart, was a single custom-made patch. It was an olive drab square with the words, "The Keeper of the Blanket," stitched in gold. One warm Saturday afternoon, the club was holding its annual family picnic. Music played, burgers sizzled on the grill, and children ran laughing through the grass. Silas was there, sitting at a picnic table with Bear, watching Lily play on the swings. "You're a long way from that sidewalk, Sergeant," Bear said, handing him a cold drink. Silas looked out at the scene of chaotic joy. He saw the bikers, these men the world saw as outlaws and thugs, playing with their children, talking with their wives, living their lives. He saw a community, a tribe. "You know," Silas said, his voice thoughtful, "for a long time I thought honor was something you defended, something you fought for on a battlefield. I was wrong." Bear looked at him, waiting. "It's not," Silas continued, turning the cold bottle in his hands. It's something you give away, like a blanket. You give it away and hope it keeps someone warm. You just never know when someone is going to give it right back to you. Bear clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder, his gruff affection a tangible thing. That's what we have, brother. It's what we all have. Lily ran up to them, her face flushed and happy. Grandpa Silas, she yelled, a name she had invented for him herself. Will you push me on the swing? Higher this time. Silas smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. He stood up, his old aches and pains just a distant memory. You got it, little bird, he said, and followed her toward the swings, a man no longer invisible, a man who had been found, a man who had come all the way home.